Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Advisory Council of the 911 Services Board Educational Initiative. I have a couple things that I want to go over before we begin, that is, and that is certificates are available. That was something that was requested a while back. And so they will be given out to those that were in attendance. Basically, as soon as this grant season gets taken care of, and that is not my main concern and focus. No AI or read assist will be allowed during this recording. It is recorded. However, it will appear on the Kentucky 911 Services Board webpage about a month from now. Other than that, if I don't have your email address, if you would please put your name and your email address over in the chat, that would be great. I will tell you that I will be monitoring the chats. So if you have a question and you don't want to speak up, you may type it into the chat and I will make sure that MCP hears what those questions are. To go a little bit further than that, so a few months ago, MCP came to the 911 Services Board and met with the staff and went through a very in-depth explanation of the core services, ESINet, and just pretty much explained everything to us in great depth. I will say that I knew a basic understanding of it, but it wasn't until they met with us that I could see that I could just see how it all was going to work together, what was actually going to be taking place and everything. So I approached them immediately and said, "Hey, would you mind doing this for the 911 community?" And they agreed. So I'm going to turn this over to Jamie and Teresa and let them introduce themselves and get started.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'm Jamie Sullivan. I am the project manager at Mission Critical Partners. I've spent about 20 years in public safety with Entrado, NGA, and about 5 years at Mission Critical. I've done and seen a lot of NG911 deployments from all the different providers. Terry Reese is your technical resource from Mission Critical. I think you may have met her, but I'll ask her to introduce herself, and then we'll get started with the presentation. Go ahead, Terry.
Okay, thank you. Again, my name is Terry Reese. I've been with Mission Critical Partners about 2 years now. I came with over 40 years of telecom experience, about 30 of which were in 911. I've been supporting you folks as you migrate to Next Gen 911. And I'm looking forward to talking to you today a little bit about what we mean when we say Next Gen 911 and what the impacts might be on all of you. So looking forward to bringing you up to speed on all that. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Terry will take the first set of slides. I'll take the last here. I guess you're just going to have to ask me when to click next to be good.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, these are the topics. An intro, brief intro to what is NG911, what the impacts to the PSAPs are, and then what the deployment across Kentucky looks like for you all. Go ahead, Terry.
All right. So some of the key characteristics of Next Gen 911 are the notions that we can support a multitude of different types of emergency calls. So not just the voice calls that are typical of E911, but also text and video. So the notion of multimedia 911 calls is kind of inherent to the Next Gen 911 system. Also, the ability to deliver calls or messages or data to the appropriate PSAP based on the location of the caller. So in a next-gen environment, and you'll hear about this a few times throughout the discussion this afternoon, we're actually using the street address or the latitude and longitude of the caller to figure out how to route the call to the appropriate PSAP. Rather than just relying on, a 10-digit number like a telephone number. The objective of NextGen 911 is also to allow for services and networks used by first responders to interoperate with the networks that are delivering 911 calls to telecommunicators. And one of the key characteristics of NextGen 911 is this notion of using standard interfaces. So in the E911 environment today, there's a lot of variation, for example, in what kind of alley data that you get, what it looks like, and what pieces of information you receive. And one of the goals with NextGen 911 was to move toward using standard interfaces. So, if you went from one PSAP to another, the sort of information that was delivered and the format that it was delivered in would be the same. And that would allow for, for either sharing of equipment if necessary, or just ability to communicate more widely between PSAPs and between networks. Next slide. So, so if we just kind of compare where we are today with where we want to be with NextGen 911, in today's environment, virtually all the 911 calls are voice calls, and they're initiated over telephones. And the sorts of trunks that they're delivered to the PSAPs over are very limited in terms of how much data can be provided with the call. In a next-gen environment, the idea is that you could have 911 calls initiated by a number of different types of communication devices, and that those calls are being transported over IP or Internet Protocol networks, and may contain voice, text, or video, or some combination thereof. So again, this notion of multimedia calling is kind of inherent to the next-gen 911 environment. In today's environment, most of the information that you need to convey, from one PSAP to another is done via voice. So if you transfer a call, you really have to tell the other PSAP, what you know about the incident as it is at that point in time. In a next-gen environment, the idea is that that information could be shared automatically when you transfer a call. So on the transfer to PSAP screen, they will see that incident information that the transferring PSAP might have gained during the process of handling that call. In today's environment, calls are routed through a specialized piece of switching equipment called a selective router. And that selective router routes based on a 10-digit number, either a callback number, or it may be a 10-digit location key that's formatted to look like a telephone number. And the alternate routing capabilities at the selective router are fairly limited. In a next-gen environment, as we said, we'll be routing calls based on geographic location, so street address, latitude, longitude, and the ability to do backup routing and also the resiliency that's built into the architecture is much more significant. In today's environment, there are limited backup options in terms of, how far you can transfer or alternate route a call. Typically, it's to a local or neighboring PSAP. Through the use of standard interfaces and the enhanced functionality in NextGen 911, the number of backup possibilities is greatly enhanced, and that the ability to alternate route to other PSAPs within the region or within the state is something that will be supported. In today's environment, there's a limited ability to handle overflow situations, so a caller may receive a busy signal. But in a next-gen environment, there is additional routing functionality built in, something we call policy routing. So you can designate to which other destination you want a call to be delivered if you experience congestion at your PSAP, and that can happen on a dynamic basis. Next slide, please. So what are the goals of NextGen 911? Well, at a minimum, NextGen 911 has to do at least or provide all the functionality that an E911 environment supports today. But the idea is that we're also introducing new technologies. So there are new call types that can be handled. There's more flexibility in terms of managing calls because you have additional data. With the use of standard interfaces, you also have additional abilities to share equipment if necessary. And then also the enhanced interoperability, again, with the notion of using a standard architecture, standard interfaces, you can better integrate and interoperate with other PSAPs or with other emergency entities and share data between them. So when we talk about NextGen 911, we talk about a system of 911 services and databases that run on an emergency services IP network, and we'll talk in a minute about what that means. And sometimes we refer to NextGen 911 as a system or network of networks. So there are many building blocks associated with NextGen 911. Fundamentally is the emergency services IP network, and that's kind of the underlying transport network that supports all the features and functions and interfaces of a NextGen 911 system. On top of that rides the NextGen 911 Core Services, or NGCS, and this is made up of a set of functions and interfaces that support, basic call routing, policy routing, and also the deliver of data with 911 calls. And there are a set of functional elements that are kind of basic to supporting that critical functionality, and they need to be there on day one, and they'll be there at the end state of NextGen 911. But there are also some transitional functional elements that are required because we recognize that it's not going to be a flash cut to get to a NextGen 911 system. You're going to have originating networks that are evolving at a different rate than the emergency services network is evolving, and the same with the PSAPs. You may have PSAPs that are in different states of NG911 readiness. So there are some transitional functional elements or gateway systems, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides, that sort of support this notion that we've got different components of the system evolving at different rates. Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, are kind of a fundamental building block of a NextGen 911 system, and that the GIS is what is so critical to supporting the location-based routing that the NextGen 911 system is known for, and also plays a critical role in validating location information so that when that location information gets to the PSAP, it will plot properly, etc. There are other functional elements that are external to the ESINet. There are some in the originating network, like location information servers that may play a role in providing up-to-date location associated with a 911 call. There's also something called an additional data repository, which is kind of a database you can access to get other information about associated with a 911 call or caller or location. Of course, the call handling system is a critical piece of the NextGen 911 system for both receiving and processing incoming 911 calls, but also to support transfers, to support the sharing of data with CAD systems, with first responders. So we'll talk a little bit about the components of that as well. And then because with the NextGen 911 system, we kind of have opened up more targets potentially for there to be security security impacts, there are some basic security functions that are built into the NextGen 911 system to address possible vulnerabilities that may be introduced by implementing the NextGen 911 system. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll start with the Emergency Services IP network. So this is a secure, reliable, private, managed IP network that's supposed to support emergency services communications. Now we say that it has to be public safety grade or 5 nines up reliability. And what that basically means is that this kind of core transport element of the emergency services architecture can have less than 5.5 minutes per year of unplanned downtime. So it has to be reliable and it has to be, secure to support all of the NextGen 911 functions. It's a network that's shared by all public safety agencies, not just 911s. So first responders could use it, other public safety entities can use this underlying transport. And one of the things that we find is that there's a lot of confusion in terms of the terminology that we use when we talk about NextGen 911. So the ESI net isn't the same as NextGen 911. It's a component of NextGen 911. It's that underlying transport, but it's not, if we say NextGen 911, we don't mean an ESI net necessarily. It's also not the same as I3. You may have heard the term I3 used in the context of NextGen 911. I3 refers to a standard architecture for NextGen 911 that was defined by the National Emergency Number Association, or NENA. And again, that's, the term I3 is not interchangeable with ESINet. It's not interchangeable with NextGen 911 because it refers to a specific architecture. And in addition, the Emergency Services IP network provides the infrastructure for the NextGen core services, as we talked about, and also supports interoperability with originating service providers, with PSAPs, and with other emergency services networks. Next slide. So let's talk about NextGen 911 core services. So we talked about that need for security when you enter or exit a NextGen emergency services network. And there's an element called a border control function that supports firewall functionality and session border controller functionality, and can also be used as a point for anchoring media. And so the job of the border control function is basically to look at the signaling that's coming in from the originating network, make sure everything checks out okay, see if there's anything suspicious about it, and then behave appropriately to protect everything downstream in the NextGen emergency services network and beyond. We talked about the enhanced call routing functionality. So we have that location-based routing that uses the GIS data as the driver for that. We talked about enhancements to alternate and default routing, and those are really tied to this notion of policy-based routing. And when we talk about policy-based routing, we have the ability for the PSAP to define a set of rules that will allow for the routing elements within the NextGen core services to make decisions based on criteria other than location about where to route that call. And it could be things like time of day, it could be it could have to do with the state of the PSAP. Is the PSAP up or down? Are they experienced congestion? Have they had to abandon? It could be based on the type of call that it is. Maybe you want text calls to go one place and voice calls to go somewhere else. So it could depend on the media. There's a whole set of criteria that you can build rules around that the routing functional elements within the NextGen core services can use as input to deciding, where the 911 call should be routed at that particular point in time. In addition to delivering the call, you will also get other additional information about the call or the caller or the location that comes with the call over the ESINet. And that can be things like the type of service, is it a call from a mobile device? Is it, the provider of the data, who provided the data, and what is their contact information in case you need to get a hold of them. So there's various kinds of additional information that you can actually deliver with a 911 call in a next-gen environment. Again, the notion of multimedia 911 call delivery over the ESINet, along with location and callback information. And we talked a little bit about the transfers, which in a next-gen environment can be within the ESINet, so between PSAPs served by the same ESINet, or could be between PSAPs served by different ESINets, and the notion of being able to convey call and incident location along with those transfers. Next slide. So we talked about the notion of location validation, and in a next-gen environment, we use GIS data to validate civic addresses, which are basically street addresses, to ensure that when you use those for routing or when you deliver them to the PSAP and they need to get plotted on a map, that they're giving you an accurate representation of what the location is. And so in converting from or transitioning from today's environment to a next-gen environment, we'll be validating those street addresses using GIS data rather than MSAG data. With next-gen core services, there are enhancements to the logging and recording and reporting capabilities. So in a next-gen environment, you'll have a logger that is served, or resides on the ESINet that is basically keeping a track of any important events that are associated with a call, any of the signaling associated with a 911 call. It will also be responsible for recording media associated with the 911 call. So those functionalities are built into the next-gen core services that ride on the ESINet. And then we talked a little bit about the transitional elements in this notion of having, a combination of next-gen capable components and legacy components. So there's something called a legacy network gateway that sits between a legacy originating network, so today's wireline or wireless network, and the ESINet, and it basically is responsible for converting the legacy signaling and data into the format that the next-gen emergency services IP network is expecting. There's legacy selective router gateways that sit between selective routers and the next-gen ESINets, and that can be either on the originating side, between the where the originating network is connected to a selective router and then to an ESINet, or they can be found on the terminating side of the architecture. So if the PSAP is still served by a selective router, then you can go from an ESINet to a legacy selective router gateway to the selective router and to the PSAP. And then legacy PSAP gateways support connectivity between the ESINet and a legacy PSAP call handling system. So it's responsible for basically converting next-gen signaling and data into a format that a legacy PSAP is capable of receiving. There's also the notion of location databases, or LDBs, and they play a role in supporting the transition between legacy ALI data and next-gen 911 data. Slide. Okay, so this is, a lot of alphabet soup on this diagram, but I just really wanted to give you an idea of kind of how these things all connect with each other. And it's not really important to understand what all the letters and everything mean at this point. And there is at the end of the slides, there's a whole set of definitions and terminology, so you can look up what all of these mean. But just to kind of give you an idea about how the different pieces fit together, if we start on the left-hand side, so that lower left-hand cloud, that legacy originating network, you see that it's connected to a legacy network gateway and then onto the i3 ESINet, or it may go through a selective router, through that legacy selective router gateway we just talked about, and to the ESINet, or on the top, the IP originating cloud. So this is a network that has already transitioned to, an IP next gen kind of operation. It can connect directly to the i3 ESINet without having to go through a gateway. Within that cloud in the middle, the i3 ESINet, you see the border control functions on the entry point and exit point. That emergency services routing proxy, or ESRP, that's the element that's responsible for performing the routing on the 911 calls, and it interacts with an emergency call routing function, or ECRF, that has that GIS data in it that will allow for the routing to look at, what location the call came in from, and it will return the identity of the PSAP to which the call should be routed. That policy routing function, or PRF, that's kind of hanging below the ESRP, that's what the ESRP will interact with to see, well, okay, what policies are active for this call? Is there, there a time of day policy active? Is there a call type policy active? And that will help the ESRP to refine the routing for that call and deliver it, forward to the appropriate PSAP. And then on the right-hand side, you see again the gateways that we talked about that allow calls to flow from the ESINet to legacy call handling systems. Or if it's an i3 PSAP call handling system, the call can go directly from the border control function to that call handling system without going through a gateway. So this just gives you an idea of kind of how this all lays out. As I said, there's some definitions at the end of the presentation. So, if you want to go back and look at it and just get a sense for, what's connected to what, that this just gives you an idea about that. Basics of NextGen 911. We're going to focus next on some of the impacts that NextGen 911 will have on the PSAPs. So we talked about the fact that with NextGen 911 we'll have some improvements in call routing. When we talk about location-based routing, and in terms of the responsibilities of the PSAPs are going to have to support the development and provisioning of accurate GIS data into the emergency call routing function, because again, that is going to drive the routing of calls in a NextGen 911 environment. So we need to have that accurate GIS data provisioned into the functional element that is going to map between the location and the routing. When we talk about GIS data, there'll need to be multiple layers or polygons that will have to be defined. So for PSAP boundaries, provisioning boundaries, emergency services boundaries, so the police, fire, and EMS. The GIS data will include road center lines and address points. And it's critical that when you define your GIS data, that you do it in such a way that there are no gaps or overlaps or misalignments, because that will negatively impact your ability to route 911 calls and to plot the locations that are delivered to you on a map to support dispatch. Now, Alerium or Comtech, who is the vendor of your ESINet NGCS, will work with you to make sure that the GIS data, is provisioned and with high quality, and that all the data is validated, so that when you actually go to implement your NG911 functionality for your particular PSAP, that things will work appropriately. Now, we talked about policy-based routing. So the notion here is that the PSAPs will provision the policy routing for different situations, for whether it's abandonment or call handling system outages, if you're down for maintenance, if there's a special event. All of these conditions are defined in a set of policy routing rules. And the PSAP staff members will have the ability to create or modify or delete or implement those rules to support policy routing of 911 calls. Now, the policy routing may occur, without you knowing in real time that it has occurred, because it may be, that a particular rule has been encountered, and so the call gets routed to an alternate route, either because of a network connectivity problem or an issue with your call handling equipment. But it will be based on the rules that you, the PSAP, have worked with Alerium to provision into the next-gen 911 system. So in order to build those rules, the PSAPs will have to have the necessary expertise to perform those functions, and there'll be training that will be provided by Alerium to help you understand what it is you need to do or how to go about provisioning these routing rules so that the policy routing will work in your system. And that may also require some new operational SOPs so that you all have the same idea in terms of how you want your policy routing situations to be handled. Slide. So we talked about the availability of additional data and media with NextGen 911. So we'll first focus on the additional data piece. So in a NextGen 911 environment, a PSAP will receive information associated with the call, caller, and location along with the 911 call. So in addition to the callback number and location information, you may also get other additional data like who provided the data and their contact information, service type information, information about the device that originated the call, information about the subscriber. So there are standard data formats that have been defined that will allow that information to be communicated to you with the 911 call. So that means that there may be a need for some training to understand exactly, how the additional data can be accessed, how it might be used to influence call handling and dispatch, and what in general is, expected of a telecommunicator associated with the receipt of this additional information. In addition, PSAPs will need to be prepared to receive multimedia 911 calls. So in addition to voice and text, the ability to provide pictures and video is something that we foresee in the future. Currently, we don't have pictures or video being conveyed via the ESINet to PSAPs. There are some over-the-top arrangements that would allow that sort of information to be provided or that sort of media to be provided. But voice and text, as well as pictures and video in the end state of NextGen 911 are media that would be provided along with the 911 call through the ESINet. There'll need to be, again, policies, training, and potentially new SOPs created to address who and how to access and use the multimedia, in particular when we talk about pictures and video in the context of handling 911 calls. So as I said, today we're not getting pictures and video through the ESINet, and the ability to receive pictures and video through the ESINet will depend on the capabilities of the originating network providers to actually provide that kind of media with the 911 call, and also the policies at the PSAP with respect to whether or not you want to receive or how you want to receive that sort of information. Okay, next slide. So the next couple of slides are going to talk about equipment upgrades that may be needed to support the next-gen environment. When we talk about upgrading call handling equipment, that can occur in kind of a multi-step process. So for many of you, what we've seen through some of the initial migrations is that you've taken the step of migrating from legacy call handling equipment to IP capable call handling equipment. And what that means is that the calls are now being delivered to you over IP connections, but the information that's being provided to you is in the same format as you would have gotten in E911 environment, and that you still need to interact with a legacy alley to retrieve location and callback number information. So that's kind of a step, in the progression toward next gen call handling equipment. Also, in this first step, you'll notice that the transfers use the legacy procedures too. So they're based on the same kind of star codes as you would use in a legacy E911 environment. The next step would be going from this IP capable call handling equipment to fully functional I3 capable call handling equipment. And in an I3 environment, the calls will be delivered over IP connections, but with the callback number and location information and other data delivered right with the call. The transfers are different. Instead of using star codes, you'll identify which PSAP you want the call to be transferred to. And that's what will be used in routing the transferred leg of the call toward that PSAP. So rather than star codes, we use SIP URIs, which are basically identifiers for the target PSAP. And as we've said previously, the transfers may support the automatic conveyance of comprehensive incident and location information. There also may need to be some enhancements to your equipment to accommodate the display of additional call-related information. So we've talked about providing a whole lot of additional information with the 911 call, but you need to know where to look for that information on your display, and you need to have displays that will accommodate the additional information that may be provided with a 911 call. So some upgrading may be needed to support the way that the information is displayed to the PSAP when a 911 call is received. Next slide. So your CAD systems may also need to be upgraded. One of the objectives with NextGen 911 is the ability to use, these standard data formats to communicate between the call handling system and the CAD, between CAD systems, and between CAD systems and first responders. And this standard data format is referred to as an emergency incident data object. And the idea is that by using, again, a standard data format and protocols, that there'll be a lot more flexibility or in the ability to exchange incident data between different elements. Obviously, the upgrades to the CAD systems and the ability to support the use of the EIDOs between call handling and CAD will have to be coordinated with the vendors of the call handling equipment and CAD systems. And in the interim, it's likely that maybe your call handling system has been upgraded, but your CAD system hasn't yet. And that doesn't mean that you can't upgrade your call handling system to next gen until all the pieces have been upgraded. Again, you can use some kind of a gateway to convert between the EIDOs and whatever format the CAD currently supports. But in order to really achieve full NENA I3 compliance, both the call handling and the CAD systems will need to be upgraded to support these standards, interfaces, and data formats. Next slide. In terms of logging and recorder upgrades, so the media recording systems will need to be upgraded to support the various types of media that will be available with NG911 911 calls. So it won't just be voice, it will be whatever media is provided with that 911 call. The logging service, the i3 logging service functionality will be responsible for logging all significant call or incident processing information. Log event and media retrieval interfaces will need to be supported. Access to IRRs will be controlled by policy. And then as an i3 capable PSAP, you may be able to access the logging service that's provided by the NGCS, either instead of or in addition to, as a backup to supporting your own local logging service. So the logging and recorder upgrades we're focusing on here are really those functions that are provided, by the ESINet as part of the next gen core services. But that's something that could be used by the PSAP in addition or instead of the local logging service. Again, upgrades to these elements would have to be coordinated with the call handling and recorder vendors. And the idea is to when you to do these upgrades to get to full NENA i3 compliance. Next slide. Okay, I guess I will turn it over to Jamie now to talk about the NG911 deployment in Kentucky.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Slide here. Okay, this isn't the prettiest looking slide, but this is just to show you kind of logically how the different pieces fit together as you transition to NG911. So calls are placed on the left side and they flow to you, the PSAPs, on the right side. Every PSAP is in one of those 7 groups on the right. If you trace it back, you'll see who you're attached to, where you're getting your calls from. Right, so I'll explain the different colors here. The black is legacy. Before you cut over to NG911, this is the flow of your calls. Obviously, there's components in the middle and all that, but basically your call would go to a selective router, one of those 4 types, and then onto the PSAP. Once you cut over to the Comtech Illyrium NG911 system, your calls will take the orange path, okay? And then onto the PSAP from there. Those points of interconnect, there's 3, one of them's temporary. You'll eventually end up with just 2, but those are the local in-state data centers where those gateways that Terry talked about would reside. So the legacy network gateway, legacy selective router gateways, where the traffic is converted to SIP and IP format that works in an NG911 environment. And then the end state is the green. Eventually the black and the orange will go away and you would just have the green flow, OSPs, the service providers that your calls originate in. Those calls would flow directly through those points of interconnect into the Illyrium EZINet core services. Some would actually not go through those POIs. They may go directly, like the big wireless carriers, for example, might have other sort of national connections to Illyrium. But for the most part, it's going to be the green flow when we're all done, and the orange and black lines would go away. Tried to put it all in one slide here. It's not the best looking, but hopefully it illustrates what I'm trying to show here. Next is this slide shows the rough timeline that you'll be cutting over to the Illyrium NG911 system. There's been, I don't know, I want to say 14 or 15, I think, that have cut over so far. There's another, I guess, 95-ish to go, okay? And depending on your group, here's your current estimated timeline for when your cutover may occur. The one on the bottom, there's a lot of, I guess there's 11 PSAPs that have standalone call handling systems. Those are kind of scattered throughout the years as you're ready. But the rest are kind of sequencing from top to bottom. So we're looking at a mid to, let's say, Q3 of 2027 completion at this point. If you have any questions about which group you're in or what have you, we have all of that information. Obviously, we can talk through that as needed. And then a note about text to 911. As part of the state's contract with Delirium, PSAPs are required to support text to 911 service. There's a few statutes here listed related to decertification and potential financial impacts of not deploying text to 911. And then sort of, oh, by the way, at the very bottom is an article related to a lawsuit in Pima County, Arizona, where a PSAP did not deploy text to 911. And sure enough, there was a wrongful death and a lawsuit and a big mess there. So I want to try to avoid that. And then some information about testing and cutover here, what your testing looks like. It generally happens the day before your cutover. It's called the pre-migration ATP, for acceptance test plan. It's the day before. Typically, it could take an hour, could take the full 8 hours, depending if there's any issues. They got to find engineers to fix problems, that kind of thing. But generally, it's the day before your cut. Delirium will place most of the test calls, but not all. We will need the PSAPs to place some, and then we'll generate different types of calls and verify, that you're getting clear audio, that you're receiving the callback number, the location information. You should be receiving your first responder information, your police, fire, EMS associated with that location, even if it's a spoofed location in the test call. Regardless, they're going to verify that you're getting that data. Going to check if you're getting the right class of service, wireline, wireless, VoIP. Same information with text, minus the audio part, obviously, but same thing with text. You'll verify your CAD is looking the way it should. Mapping functionality works. Logging and audio recording and all of that is working as expected. You'll be asked to make transfers to neighboring PSAPs and other 10-digit destinations. And then they'll test policy routing as well. I think there's a couple of conditions they'll test. And again, these are pre-provisioned policies based on these, potential 5, 10 things that could happen. Here's how you want those calls routed. And they'll verify a couple of triggers like ring, no answer, which is basically a timeout where if an NG911 network can't deliver a call to you, there's no response from your call handling, ring no answer trigger would occur and the call would policy route as was pre-provisioned. So that would be one method of testing that the policy routing works. And there's other shutdown conditions that can be tested as well. So they'll verify that as part of the pre-migration ATP. And I've got a note here. We want to make sure that for your testing and cutover, this will help everybody tremendously. It's good for everybody to make sure that you can do the full suite of tests and the full suite of verification after you've cut over to verify everything is working as expected. So you're going to want to have test devices. Obviously, it'd be great if you had a AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon cell phones. Those typically aren't too hard to find, but sometimes there's maybe one of those carriers that isn't available. Try to locate them. Could be anybody, could be a policeman out in the field that has one, that sort of thing. And we're going to want them to be available to make test calls. Same with wireline and VoIP phones, devices. Those are kind of harder to find nowadays, but again, it's a type of test, a type of call that we want to verify works as expected. So you're asked to have at least the devices in possession if you can, from all of those different call types. If not, perhaps you could have a caller, somebody at City Hall or something maybe that could make a call for you type thing that is using that type of device. If you're not sure what type of device it is, sure, go ahead.
Sorry, Jamie. I was going to cut in here. I have 3 things. One is when we do your pre-migration, a lot of times we will tell you which of the 911 staff will be there and what cell phone providers we have. So our office cell phones are AT&T. And for instance, I have Verizon. So when I go, I do both tests for both of those. So you may just need to get a T-Mobile or I don't know what everybody has, but I just know what I have. But we do that a lot for you. The second thing is that we have two questions in the chat box. One is, will this cut out our local phone companies using analog lines to transport our calls to Comtech?
No, no, that will not, no. There's never, if you're asking if your calls will be impacted in a way, then no. The testing that occurs is really in parallel with your live 911 service today. None of your live 911 service should be impacted whatsoever.
I think that question was before we got into the testing stuff. I think it had to do with, whether or at what point the analog lines to Comtech, I think it had to do more with your diagram, would
Yes,
would
Teresa,
no
that's
longer
what I was asking.
exist. Okay, yeah, and actually that's tied more toward or with the FCC, the recent rules related to NG911 transition. So the OSPs are required to move from the existing connectivity arrangements to IP-based, SIP format, but based on a valid request for service from the 911 authority. So in order to make a valid request for service, the 911 authority has to certify that it's ready to receive 911 calls in IP-based format requested, that it has commitments from the ESINet provider, NGCS provider, call handling equipment provider, to complete connectivity testing with the OSP, that it's can accept calls in the IP-based format requested, and that it's notified the OSP that it meets these requirements, and it has the necessary in-state delivery points. So a lot of the OSPs, I mean, some of the bigger ones are transitioning to IP based, arrangements already, but they're really only obligated to, once the 911 authority makes a valid request, to the OSP, and it meets these criteria, like having your ESINet and NGCS and call handling equipment in place. And then the originating service provider has 6 months to support the delivery of SIP or IP-based SIP calls. It may not be the full I3 capability, that's considered phase 2, but at least, delivery over IP connections would be required from that point. So that's kind of a separate thing that's going on at the same time as you're going through your migration. That the OSPs, as I said, some of the larger wireless service providers are kind of doing the conversion to IP on their own. But some of the smaller ones will probably have to, be pushed by engaging this FCC process, that says, we've submitted a valid request. You now have, 6 months, or for the small rural ones, a year to provide the IP connectivity.
Thank you. There is
Okay.
a second question here. It says that their agency has received an official notice from InDigital that InDigital has decided to decommission their Kentucky data center operations with no specific date and not likely before 2030. However, for our PSAP, they notified that they will terminate our agreement effective 10/10/2026 and no longer be obligated to provide services. What does that mean moving forward for any of the 10 of the digital PSAPs?
Well, my take, my knee-jerk reaction to that is you can't just turn off 911, right?
Right.
So I would question that for one thing.
Mhm.
Secondly, we would have to try to make arrangements to see if we could, work with Illyrium to speed up your migration. We'll have to talk about that. It impacts potentially your GIS data and whatever you need to do there and that sort of thing. We'll have to talk about it. But I question that they would actually shut it off. I don't know. We'll have to look at that. Just briefly went back to this diagram here if it helped with any of the conversation. Was there anything else, Mark, we wanted to address before I carried on?
Nope, go right ahead.
Okay, I think there was just one last point here on this testing support slide, and that is the identification of your wireline and VoIP devices. Many people don't know what it is. You can ask Illyrium to assist with that verification, or you could make a 911 call from those devices and find out for yourself based on the class of service that comes through. RESD is residence, BUSN is business. Those are wireline. And then VoIP is VoIP, and there's apparently a few others that begin with a V as well that are VoIP class of service. Okay, again, we want to do this before your day of testing. So reach out if you need help with that. And then the day of your cutover or your migration. Again, we'll be doing a lot of the same tests you did the day before, right? Making test calls from, well, there will be a time at the beginning where they'll verify each of the call types are working before they start making cutovers on equipment and whatnot to make sure, something's broken or not before they get started. But once they're ready, the cutover will occur, and then you'll be making calls from all of these different device types after the fact to verify that they're coming through correctly. Again, that you have clear audio, you have the callback number and location, the class of service, text to 911 messaging will be verified, your responders mapping, your CAD and loggers look good, all that sort of thing. You will not be testing policy routing after go live because at that point you're live and we don't need to take you down to check that out. So that won't be tested, but it will have been tested the day before. So high confidence that it'll continue working. Again, we'll test things like transfers of all the call types, transferring to a couple of different neighbors, verifying they get the anti-alley data and that sort of thing. All expected functionality is available and working. Again, the same thing. The devices have people available if you don't have the devices yourselves that could make calls for you if necessary. And then this is the table at the end with all of the different sort of a glossary here of all the different acronyms that are out there. There's probably double this that are out there. This is a lot, but these are the ones we talked about for the most part. That was all we had. Do we have another round of questions or discussion anybody would like to have?
Now it's your chance, people, because I hear a lot of questions on a normal basis.
This is Larry Frazier from River County 911. Where I was going with will this cut out our local phone companies is I had heard that once we went to NG911, we would not have to pay Windstream to transfer our phone calls to AK Associates anymore, to the Central Kentucky 911 network. Is that correct?
If you look at this, the green arrows, you see how you're bypassing that Windstream LSR, the pink box of the third one down there?
Yep.
Eventually, once you get to this point, the green, then yeah, the Windstream selective router as well as the AT&T selective router would be out of the mix. Now, it may be possible that Illyrium still has connections to them so that you can transfer to a PSAP that might still be attached to them. However, it should not be the same charges to you. I believe it would be covered under the state contract, and you wouldn't have to continue paying that. So yeah, I think the answer to that is true, but it's going to take a while to get
Thank
there.
you. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, MCP, we thank you so much for this detailed explanation, trying to make this a little bit more clear for all of us. As we move forward, we are excited. I believe we are on number 15 to transfer over to migrate, and we are seeing very little issues, and people are extremely happy with the outcome. So, if you wish to know where you are in the process or when you're going to be migrated over, you may reach out to the 911 Services Board office and we will give you an estimated date. We do not know exact date yet. I know that starting in May, we are going to 2 migrations per week. So right now we're currently doing 1 per week. And in May, we will begin doing 2 per week. So we hopefully will be getting to you all soon. Thank you all very much for joining, and thank you, MCP.
You bet. Thanks,
You're
everybody.
welcome.
Have a great day.
Bye.